Is this thing on? Is this thing on? Yes. Good morning, comrades. You are watching Good Morning Comrade. Good morning, comrade. Twitch.tv/Good Morning Comrade. We have today a very special guest. We have the one and only Matt Strackbein, aka the Letter Hack. What is going on, dude?
Hey, thanks for having me on here. It's good to see you.
Yeah, and just to before we get started, it's not going to be the entire point of the conversation, but I did want to give a heads up to the audience. You have a comic called Milagro coming out. I want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. Milagro is my newest self-published comic book. It's a 70-page full-color graphic novel. It's told in 3 chapters, but it's a contained story. So we're not going to leave you hanging at the end of the story. So you get a whole story in this one book. Mm-hmm. And the Kickstarter is live now. We were actually funded on the 4th day. So, and we've already passed our first stretch goal. So we're on the way to the second stretch goal. Mm-hmm. And in that case, everyone gets more for their contribution. You don't have to give more. You just get more, the more people who support our campaign. But the comic itself is, I like to say that it's a comic about a wrestler, not a wrestling comic per se. Mm-hmm. It's a story of a failed luchador who goes into self-exile. He's homeless, living on the streets of Mexico City, where he finds a path to redemption. And it's the tale of what it takes to be a hero when all you know how to do is fight. So it's a brutal fight comic. We actually say it's rated BV for brutal violence. It's not for kids, but it is a sort of story that should appeal to a wide range of people. It doesn't take place in America, although it is an American comic. So we made sure to bring on a Spanish translator, somebody from Mexico City, who could help us get the right dialogue and dialect and the right sort of slang. You know, there's multiple ways to insult people. If you know somebody, if it's like a long-term bitter rivalry, you would insult them one way. And if it's casual, you would insult them another way. So we want to make sure we get those details right. But also, you know, it's a comic about a guy who wrestles as combat. So we also brought on an actual wrestling coach to help with all the fight choreography. We want to make sure that the moves work and that wrestling fans would be like, oh, wow, these guys did it correct. But also our consultant, his name is Raul Ramirez. He's the founder of the Catch Wrestling Alliance. He tells us how to modify the moves for brutality, because the majority of the fighting takes place in the street outside of the wrestling ring. So there's no referee. So if you want to do the move in like a quote unquote illegal way, you know, and break bones, go for it.
Yeah.
And so he's telling us how to do that. So we're trying to make it authentic and entertaining. And if you see something in the comic and you think to yourself, oh, that would never happen, it totally would. Mm-hmm. Everything in the comic could actually happen. So it's grounded in reality. Although when it comes to the violence, you only want to see this type of violence in like a comic book or a movie, not real life. You know, you wouldn't be able to unsee some of this stuff in the real world. So, you know, we're trying to keep it on the page.
That's getting me actually pretty excited about the comic, to be clear. And
cool.
This kind of a thing hits me in like the double sweet spot. Like I'm as a longtime wrestling fan and a longtime comics fan, which I know that there's a significant amount of crossover in those communities.
Yeah, but, totally.
That's really great. We actually had a friend of mine, Aubrey Sitterson, who also writes comics. Oh, he writes. He's not an artist, but he did an entire history with Chris Moreno of it's called the comic book story of professional wrestling, and it's absolutely incredible. You should definitely check it out if you're.
I think that sounds very familiar. I think I've seen that before. You know, there's like, I don't want to give too much away, but I don't want to be cryptic either. There's an epic fight right in the middle of the story, like toward the end of the second chapter. There's a big fight, mm-hmm. And the way the writer's name is Guillermo Zagara, and it's drawn by Ross Radke, and I do all the colors and lettering. I actually came up with this concept. I created the character in the comic book, but it was one of those ideas that immediately got too big for me. And I knew I would have to bring on people to help. So I got the writer, I got the artist and the consultants and the translator, and we're trying to do it right. Mm-hmm. But this big fight scene is a sort of thing where someone like yourself might go, you know what? I think this reminds me of a certain fight, like a famous fight. So we're not copying anything, but we're doing combinations of moves that hopefully people will recognize from like highlight reels or something like the history of wrestling might depict, you know? So yeah, so that's what I mean when I say hopefully it appeals to a wide variety of people.
Sure. And yeah, let's talk a little bit about your sort of like background in what you do. So you write comics. What kind of got you into the whole industry? What kind of got you there, and where are you at now? Did you kind of grow up going to the shop and buying the new books and all these other things, or? Yeah.
So I grew up in my mother's neighborhood. So my grandparents were like a block away, and I overcame my fear of going into their scary attic. They had like this long, creepy staircase that went up to this door, and then there was this attic behind it. And I was always afraid of that as a young kid. I'm talking like 8, 9 years old. And I went up there and I said, I just want to see what kind of stuff they have up there. So my curiosity got the best of me. And turns out all they had was boxes of Silver Age comic books.
Oh my gosh.
So like Spider-Man #6. Stuff like that, all kinds of Superman and Batman from the 60s and 70s. And I literally just sat there consuming that stuff for the rest of my childhood.
Yeah.
And every chance I got, I would go to the, local 7-Eleven or whatever. My 7-Eleven had a great spinner rack. They had some great comic books offered. Mm-hmm. But my mother was the Avon lady and selling makeup. So I would go door to door putting like the new catalog and perfume samples on all the doors. And she would give me money for this in advance. So I end my route at that 7-Eleven where I would spend the money on comics. Mm-hmm. And so it was just a matter of time before I started trying to draw them myself, because as a collector of comics, I really want to contribute to the industry. I just want to give back to that media so much that I started making my own comics. And then when I got into adulthood, I became.
Before you get there, I wanted to ask the first thing that you remember that you drew that you were like really proud of.
Oh, the Incredible Hulk.
Uh-huh.
I love so. I don't know why this is. I think because. Okay, so I guess because you can draw the
giant wrestler, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So you get to draw the big muscly guy. He's really angry. He's not quite a monster, but he might as well be with the look on his face. And then you get out the crayons or the markers and you get to make him green.
Yeah.
So I thought that was cool.
The perfect thing for a kid to draw, right?
Yeah. And as a child, the Incredible Hulk TV show was still on. With Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno.
Yeah.
I've met Lou Ferrigno a handful of times as well. I arm wrestled him one time.
Did you win?
No. He didn't even give me a chance. He just took me straight down. He goes, normally I charge people for this. Well, I think he was kidding, but I was like, charge him to lose? Okay.
You charging people for a story, right?
Right, exactly.
I arm wrestled Lou Ferrigno and I got this close.
Yeah.
The people.
So I always drew my own stories, and then as I got older, I started to write letters to the editor of comics, and that's what a letter hack is, a prolific letter writer. And they call him a hack because a lot of these guys ended up breaking into the industry in one way or another. Oh, so like, David Goyer, who wrote the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, he was a letter writer. Famous, I guess, who is it? Mark Waid, I think, is a famous comic book writer. Yeah. He started out as the letter hack. And my big contribution was to the Hellboy universe. I did it. Yeah, it was cool. So I was kind of like had this faux anger about certain things in the Hellboy universe. Like they would kill off good guys and bad guys, but they would keep bringing the bad guys back to life and not the good guys. So I always got, pissed off about that in my letters. And eventually the editor said, can you do 2-page backup stories, explain the history of some of our characters, which are more complex? Mm-hmm. And so I did 4 of those and got popular as like, the voice of that fan base in a way.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so then I started doing it on Twitter for left-wing progressive media, independent media, like, listener supported stuff. And I can't contribute to Patreons and that sort of thing. So I promote them through my artwork.
Yeah.
And so, now more people know me as the letter hack than Matt Strackbein, which I think is awesome. That's fine with me.
So Hellboy, what was so appealing about that comic in particular to you? Just to kind of like drill down on it, because if you're going to be writing letters to the point where people start asking you to do background on it, what's so like jump off the page, like really hitting you in the sweet spot about that particular comic?
Yeah, first of all, Mike Mignola, the creator, is brilliant. Just one of the best. He's got a minimalistic style, but he does so much with it. Mm-hmm. And I've been a fan of his since I think I bought the first comic by him in like 6th grade, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can imagine him asking me to do comics for his comics is like mind blowing, right?
Mike asked you directly about it. Like he asked you, like Mike Mignola is like, "Hey, Matt, can you write this up for me or something?"
Through the editor. But there was one time where the editor came back after I submitted the first one, and he goes, "I love this, and Mike loves this," and I was like,
"That's awesome."
I was like, "You don't even have to pay me." I'll take it. And so, I think what drew me to Hellboy was some comics will tell you everything and they'll hold your hand. Mm-hmm. And there's a golden rule in comics creating called show, don't tell. So there's some times where you just show it and you let the reader figure it out. And these guys would bring up so many questions and story points that wouldn't get resolved or would go unanswered for literally decades, that it would keep you on the hook. Mm-hmm. And you would keep reading for that. Meanwhile, there's genuine stories. There's thoughtfully designed characters, and the way and they write for the reader in a lot of ways. It's very rewarding. But like honestly, like 3/4 of the content is a mystery. Mm-hmm. And so you're sort of waiting around to figure out what the mystery is, and you come up with your own theories and stuff. And so that creates a more interactive readership and community. And so, it was unique. And to be as successful and do like movies and stuff like that, it's impressive. There's a lot of comics that are, there's a new animated series called Invincible that's based on a comic, and everyone's loving that. And they're like, well, they say, I hope they do more seasons. And I say, hey man, just go read the comics.
Yeah, right.
It's already there. You can check it out now. And so with Hellboy, it's the sort of thing where as much as they do outside of the comics are still the best part. Mm-hmm.
Which is often the case. It's almost every time. And, it's almost like a cliche. Like when people say, and
I like the book better.
Yeah. It's like Alan Moore, for example, like is famous for hating every non-comic representation of his work because it is originally conceived of and like created for the comics medium. Like it makes the most sense. And like you might think like Watchmen was a great movie or whatever, but like even that like doesn't it like you cannot do the same things with you don't have the space in between each panel in a movie like they
Right.
do in a comic. Like the schema section is what I took a comics class in college, and it was just like one of those things where I like noticed it, and it's like, okay, that actually does make a lot of sense, because
You're
it's
right.
literally a bunch of still images with some text and some speech bubbles and whatever, and the story is really what happens on those spots and in between them, and it's got to flow.
Yeah. It's amazing how you can control how much time is conveyed between just two panels
Yeah.
in a comic, whereas in a movie, it's like, wait a minute, what happened? Is this a new scene? What's going on?
Yeah.
And also the budget for a comic, like you can blow up a whole planet in a comic for the same price as drawing like, a smiling face. In a movie, it's like, oh, we got to cut that out. We don't have the money for it. So comics, you can get a lot further in comics. And they in my past, I was like, oh, maybe I'll do maybe I'll write a book, like a novel or a short story or something. And I'm like, wow, I could just do so much more with a comic if I can do a quick zoom in on somebody's raised eyebrow or something like that, right? Or literally cut to an alien planet and not have to worry about, well, we're going to have to do costume and get casting and when it comes to a novel, it's like, okay, I got to take a moment to like explain that there's a shift in the story. But, comic books just make things easier and more fun as a creator. And maybe this came up in your in the course that you took, which sounds like it paid off if you're talking about the space between panels.
Yeah.
But there's a certain relationship, or I guess there's a certain experience that happens between the creator and the page that is entirely different from what happens between the page and the reader.
Oh yeah, and it's different for every reader.
Yeah, and so it's not only like it's not my intention for how the reader should interpret the comic. It's just the way I experience the comic while making it. So comic books have different experiences for different parts of the process. Like, I don't know if that's true for a car maker. Right. You know what I mean? Or a plumber or something like that.
Got to drive on the road, and when you turn the wheel, it's got to do certain things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Be standardized.
Yeah. And one other comparison I'll make to movies just to show how we're doing things differently is, I think in movies, you have like your part as a movie maker. You're like, no, I just do the boom mic, or I just do the camera or the lighting or whatever. Whereas in a comic, the writer, the artist, the colorist, the letterer, they all have an opportunity to contribute to the story. So if you imagine like a stage with a spotlight, we keep the story in the spotlight, and each one of us dips in and out to support the story. Whereas a lot of this even happens in comics a lot, and I've made them this way, and it's not as fun, but it's okay. You can do it. But it's like the writer does his part and then leaves. And then the artist comes in, does his part, and he leaves. And they all have their moment in the spotlight. And then when you go back and read the finished product, you're like, oh, they made changes I wasn't counting on. So,
oh, okay.
Right.
So, even is it just different between like each reader and each, like it's different between each creator? It's like, I actually never thought of that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So here's a great example. Yesterday, I shared a pretty big page, and there's a lot of blood on this page. And
hell yeah.
Not mine, in the comic. And
okay.
No one cut themselves. It's a wicked paper cut or something. But the artist said, I think, so what you have here is a blood splatter. I think that would probably be more of a smear. And I was like, oh, you're right. So I went back and changed it to a bloody smear. And I was like, that's so much better and more appropriate. But you can see how if I was just out here on my own at that stage, that feedback wouldn't have been included and the story wouldn't have been as good.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly back and forth. Like I'll get rough thumbnails that are little tiny Post-it note size thumbnails of, a whole page. And I'll color that and send it back to the artist and go, here's what I'm thinking. And so when he renders it as pencils and eventually ink, he's taking into account, oh, Matt's going to color it this way, and he had this blocked out for lighting or contrast or whatever. And so it gives him a leg up. And that's kind of unconventional, but when you're collaborating on an indie level, it's up to you, and there's no publisher or editor. It's up to you to assume all those roles and to just, once again, make sure the story itself is in the spotlight.
Sure. What was the first job you ever had in comics? What's the first thing you'd ever written or on, or that you could sort of do that you got paid for, really?
Well, it's funny because I had a newspaper route as a kid so that I could read the comics pages, the comic strips. And so my dad could read the newspaper. So I was like, hey, I'll hook up the family with free newspapers every day. I just got to deliver them. So that was technically my first paid gig in comics. But it was the Hellboy stuff that really, because I had a 6-figure job at an international corporation at the time. And it was very artistic, but it wasn't comics. So I wasn't really looking for like paid comic work. I just wanted to embrace the art form. And I wanted to, have that experience as a creator, but also watch people consume it on the other end of the process. But so Hellboy is really where that was like my first major professional work. Outside of that, I'm actually, man, my wife hates this, but I do a lot of shit for free. I can't help it. I have this altruistic vibe that I just need everyone to experience this stuff for fun and have more art and get information. But I find it hard to do anything for money. So I contributed a comic book story. I think it was 4 pages to this great anthology called Where We Live. All the proceeds to this went to the survivors and victims' families of that tragic Las Vegas shooting in 2018.
Oh my God.
Remember that? Everyone wants to forget that, but even if the book is still available now, and if you bought it, all the money goes to a worthy cause. There was like 107 different creators on that book. So I did it for free, but here's how I use it to my benefit. It like won awards, right? So I'll say I was a part of a award-winning book, which I was one of 107 people on the award-winning book, but I don't have to reveal all of that information.
106 other award winners. That's
right. Exactly.
Right. Y'all did it together.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe it was my story that put it over the edge. But so I have a lot of things I can tout outside of being paid to do it. But yeah, the Hellboy stuff is really, that's what I'm most popular for, if I'm popular at all, is the Hellboy stuff.
Cool. And so now what you do, one of the things I noticed that in many people in sort of like the sort of like weird left media sphere that many of us inhabit, like people like that do shows like this, know you for a lot of the art that you do for like you were talking about this earlier, like for these kinds of things. Our friend Andrea, you did really hilarious and terrific kind of portraits of her, or like action shots of her like leading a pack of dogs like in the streets.
The elephants.
Is that elephants?
Yeah,
elephants. You all do a lot of sort of things for like the Majority Report, like the of some Peanuts types comics and things like that. Do you want to talk a little bit about what brings you to doing that? What motivates you to do that? Because that's kind of your thing on
No, it's funny because I was on Twitter for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. I had no purpose. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of like vitriol and hate and just it's, toxic. And I was like, yeah, I'm kind of contributing to that. I don't really have anything to contribute outside of that. So I got off. Yeah. And I deleted the account. And it was like 9 to 10 months later, I started out consuming, like after I left the corporate world, I went freelance and had more time to watch YouTube shows and hear podcasts all day. And I started out with all the ones that were loudest and amped up and like not speaking truth to power, but like shouting truth to power. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, hold on. This is not healthy to just consume this rage content, right? I still do, but I needed a balance. And so I deliberately looked for something that was more boring or serious.
You look
And
boring show.
yeah, and so like I landed on a Majority Report interview.
I'm sorry, could you like talk about like which kind of programs you were talking about, the ones that are examples of the
TYT, the Young Turks, that's your gateway to progressive media right there, right? That's your gateway drug.
A lot of people, and it was for me too.
Yeah. And Kyle Kalinske and even Jimmy Dore at first. Not anymore. But, it started out with anyone who was acting how I felt.
Right.
I don't go around raging it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't talk about politics by swearing at the top of my lungs, but I like it when people do, because somebody's got to, right? And so I was watching a lot of that, and I finally ended up, I saw an interview by Sam Seder for the Majority Report, and I was like, this is it. This is like the boring stuff that I wanted, right? Like it's serious. It's the same thing, but he's not railing against the system. He's dissecting it and analyzing it.
Yeah, and engaging.
Right. So then, after the interview, I could tell there were other people on the show, but not on camera. And I heard Michael Brooks cackling in the background. And I was like, what is this? And I said, oh, what do they have? A funny man? And then I realized this is unique. This is something totally different. This guy he can be deeply serious about a topic and extremely ridiculous in the same sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's the balance that I want. Look at how he's conveying content by being hilarious and on point at the same time. And so I was like, I need to just illustrate that literally. I'm going to make comics about these guys. So I got a new Twitter account. The letter hack name was still available, fortunately, right? So I fired up a brand new Twitter account and started doing that, and people responded to it. And so I essentially just poached their audience for myself, which is a win-win, because more people are coming to this, to these shows through my comics. So more people are reading comics. Perfect, right? That's what I want. And more people are consuming media outside of the mainstream, which is also what I want. And so it's a win-win-win situation, right? So
cycle sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And then so that kind of took off, and people began to resonate with that. So I said, well, now I have a responsibility to branch out myself and start watching as many shows as possible. And so I started to, when you're working freelance graphic design or design, you end up pretty much sleeping like 4 or 5 hours a night and working the rest of the time. So I had these podcasts on all day and night. And I was like, that guy's hilarious. I'm going to make a comic about him. She said something funny. I'm going to make a comic about her. And then it was like, all right, well, that could potentially get a little stale. And so then I was like, well, maybe what I should do is spoof existing comics and stuff like Peanuts or The Simpsons, stuff that people already get, to help the comic get to them quicker. It's like a bridge, right? And so it's like, if you see a comic about Sam Seder, you might be like, what is this? But if you saw a comic about Sam Seder and it looks like one of those Simpson Halloween episodes, you're like, okay, well, I get that. Let me pay a little bit closer attention.
Yeah, referential, kind of like it's almost like a little bit meta, right?
Right. Yeah, right. It is. That's perfect. And it's layered. And so like I did a Peanut style cartoon last night, and somebody was saying, like, a few people said that they were tearing up and that they felt emotional. And I asked myself, how much of that is the comic I made, and how much of it is just how they feel about Charlie Brown and Snoopy? Because I totally just stole the Peanuts concept, changed it up so that these are real people, and dealing with like a pretty, somebody passing away is a big deal. That's not a lighthearted thing. unless you're talking about, I don't know, Jeff Bezos or something like that. But for the most part, it's something that should be handled delicately. And when you put things in a comic, you run the risk of parody.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're right. It should be more meta than spoof at times. But a lot of times I'll outright say, here's a Peanuts spoof. Like, I don't want anyone to think it was an original idea beyond, you know, because you got nonfiction people, nothing original about that. It's an inside joke from the show, typically. So, you know, the goal, I guess, is to make it as inclusive as exclusive, right? And that is tricky. And so I basically just say, all right, what's the topic? Who's the subject? Okay, what existing content can I sort of poach to bring all this together into, you know, there's no originality in the world. It's just using different elements in an original.
Everything is reference to something else at some level.
Right, exactly. So I'm just being.
That's like fundamental to it's fundamental to essentially like any kind of like essentially it's building up on things. There's this weird, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like there's this weird sort of like feeling that like if somebody created something that belongs to them in sort of some sort of like proprietary way, like the concept of intellectual property, like I do believe that if you create something you should benefit from it for sure, but also that belongs to the world, you know.
Right.
And if you're copying something directly and trying to make money off of it, that's one thing. That's not creating anything else. But if you're adding to something, then that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's going to happen all the time. You know, you're creating something, not stealing anything, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, if somebody ever sent me like a cease and desist, okay, no problem. Because my work is done here. Somebody read the comic, it led them to a YouTube channel, and now they're subscribed. Done. I can get rid of anything and not proceed. I'll think of something else. Like I did a whole series leading up to the last presidential election of left-wing commentators as Norman Rockwell paintings. And people really responded to those. And I think I struck the perfect balance between these people recognized the genius of Norman Rockwell and also the authenticity of these commentators. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the juxtaposition I created by putting the right person in the right scene or painting generally worked, I think, and made people, you know, brought people to the art and their channels at the same time. And so, you know, I can move on. I can do other things. I did a couple of Cheech and Chong one time. And I don't know if people know who Cheech and Chong are, but seeing two guys with headbands and smoking fat joints is hilarious, you know? Yeah. So especially when they're talking about, you know, politics or the Supreme Court or whatever.
Well, and so, like that actually, like, so that image, like, I don't know. I can't tell you how many times I've like been in that setting where somebody gets like, you know, starts smoking a joint or whatever. And it's just like, man, the Supreme Court is bullshit, you know? That's just true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like things through the experience in a certain sense, which is why it works.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like you're introspective through a cloud of pot smoke, right? It's and trying to get deep on certain topics. And yeah, it's, you know, real life is not polished. Real life is not like, you know, overproduced. In fact, it's underproduced. And I think that's the beauty of life. So, you know, if that stuff comes across in the comics, fantastic. But really, there's two goals. I want to support independent left-wing media, and I want to, you know, grab their audience so that they're literally reading more comics.
Yeah.
You can convey, it's like we were saying, it's so fun and easy to convey information through comics that, yeah, that's what a comic is. It's just trying to get the idea out there. It's trying to give people information through the juxtaposition or the harmony of words and images.
Mm-hmm. And one of the ones that we mentioned this a little bit earlier too, you use Peanuts a lot, which I think is an interesting choice. Why do you use Peanuts so much in terms of like framing kind of device? I mean, obviously you're a fan. That's probably part one. That's probably one, not insignificant part of it. But also, like, I don't know. What is it about Peanuts that works as sort of like a way that you do this?
You're right. I am a fan. It's one of those. It's one of those things I got hooked on very early. I think it was my mother had the original Peanuts collections when they were drawn like a lot different than they were later. And Charles Schulz, I had access to his biography at a young age. It's one of the first books I read all the way through. And all I can tell you is this one line stood out to me all these years later. He said, drawing comics or cartooning, I'm paraphrasing, is drawing the same thing every day differently. And I was like, well, that's it. That's what I got to do. He draws Charlie Brown the exact same way, but it's always different somehow, right? And that is not easy. That's going to be a challenge that I want to embrace. Also, Peanuts, you look at something like their original Christmas special, being religious or reading from the Bible in a cartoon or a comic strip at that time was highly controversial. People were like, hey, we don't need this. But then when you actually see the content, you're like, wow, he did it just right. He hit all the right notes. It was totally appropriate for the characters. He's not being preachy. This is what the people in the story are saying. This is what they're feeling and thinking. It has nothing to do with us. We're just watching their world unfold. Yeah. And so for me, putting real world people or even my own comics in some sort of a Peanuts fashion immediately gets people in the mindset that I'm watching something that is, it's not my personal experience. It may be relatable, but this isn't for me. This is for me, but it's not about me. And it's so funny because you could just draw, I draw Sam Cedar leaning on the brick wall. And right away you're like, okay, this is Charlie Brown just kind of being bored. But it's Sam Cedar and I know him. And so now these themes work in tandem. And it's not even something that I think people are grasping right away. It just happens. So Peanuts happens to be the easiest way to just flip a switch and get people engaged like right away. And I don't. It works with Simpsons stuff too, but I think like Simpsons won't be afraid to exploit themselves, whereas Peanuts, actually, that's not true because Peanuts did sell out a lot of licensing stuff.
Mostly after Schultz died, though, right?
Yeah, I think so. But that really just felt like saturation, not jumping the shark. It felt like, yeah, of course, Peanuts is everywhere I look. It's part of our life, not just American society, but the globe.
Yeah. One of the funniest sort of juxtapositions between this is me personally, and I'm maybe other people feel this way, but like the sort of portrayal that you have of Sam Cedar as Charlie Brown is very funny, and I think it's pretty bang on. And at the same time, in real life, we have like people in real life like ducking having a conversation with Charlie Brown. like, oh no, Charlie Brown, what a fucking nightmare,
Yeah, right. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. That's really good because it just shows how people can demonize even the most wholesome guy, right? Like he's like Sam Cedar's harmless in the way he goes after libertarians.
Yeah, he asks questions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. He's just being real lawyerly about it. He's just going to ask you questions and then pick apart your answer, and it's all intentional. And at the end of the day, he doesn't hate him. He's not like mean about it. I mean, I guess he could be mean like in a teasing way, but
he definitely entertains the conversation and he wants to maintain the dialogue that exists. Like when other people are like a little bit more dismissive, for good reason, by the way, he'll ask them to stop.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. I just think that there's a lot to be said for depicting real people as cartoons in the first place. Like I said, it could immediately come off as silly or not worth your time, or this guy's just cartoony. I mean, we live in a meme world.
Oh yeah,
right?
That's true.
And memes everywhere. And people, one time somebody commented on my comic and said, "This is a great meme." And I was like, yeah, I mean, you could repurpose it as a meme, but I made a comic. And he goes, "Well, it's a meme now." And I was like, just putting a comic online doesn't make it a meme. But it showed me that people are willing to pick up information like on the short, like one picture, one word, got it,
Sure.
Right? I can move on. And so I was like, okay, so I can get away with that. And so my next challenge is to bring people into a longer narrative. And by that, I mean 2 to 4 panels, right? Yeah. Like it's going to take you 2 to 5 minutes to read this and really, really look at it. And my line work is typically very simple and not overly detailed. So it's even easier to convey and to receive. But I think that you don't want, like I did one last week that was sort of, it's as close to the edge as I'm going to get with insulting somebody or putting somebody in a awkward position. Mm-hmm. You might know the comic I'm talking about. I don't know, but it's it didn't have Sam Cedar in it, but it had his likeness in it.
Okay.
And this is what I mean by walking the line, right? Yeah, the body pillow. Yeah. So I've been saying for years, if you get me to this many Twitter followers, I'll do a controversial Sam Cedar comic and he'll like retweet it. Mm-hmm. But I never got there. This was the first time. But right before I hit tweet, I was like, well, let me just think about it. Who am I really insulting here, if anybody? Politicians? Fuck them.
Powerful people in the world.
Yeah.
They can take it.
Yeah. And so what it comes down to is this. Whether it's Sam Cedar being mean to you or me making fun of you in a comic, here's the thing. You put yourself out there. Right. You put yourself on camera. You put yourself, in front of a microphone. You're the one who goes on every day for a certain amount of hours and speaks your mind and says whatever you're thinking. So it's on you, whatever happens now. Right. Just like people have taken my comics before and put words on them or done stuff to them. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I didn't copyright that. I mean, I do, like Milagro, that's copyrighted. You better believe nobody's taking my idea there. I had that idea in 2004 and nobody did it. In all this time that I just let it sit there or just reworked it. And Guillermo and I, the writer, we've been working on this comic for years, just trying to like figure out the universe and everything and all the backstories before we ever brought Ross on as an artist. And really it's one of those things where if nobody did the idea, then it either isn't good enough to do, right? Or it's the greatest idea that nobody thought of. What was that question?
Family Circus Mom, hot or not?
Sorry. Oh yeah, hot. Yeah, the short hair, super hot. and so modern, wearing pants all the time, hot, man.
Yeah,
hot. You gotta love, strong female characters are nothing but hot.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a little bit.
It's a good one,
but
it brings up a good point though, is that we have a fight comic. It's about a luchador who's living on the streets, but he's still wearing his mask all the time. You could, take certain things just from the concept and assume certain things about the comic. But we actually have some very strong female characters and everyone gets in on the action. It's awesome. A generational story. So we have like, old lady, like a grandmother.
Which fits into the lucha sort of idea of like tradition, like the masks are passed down from one person to their, son or nephew or whatever.
There's so much tradition. Like when that's why I say we spent years crafting it, we were really like, which part should we tell first? what elements from luchador pop culture should we implement now or later, right? And there's so much stuff to do. Like, there's luchador movies and comics going back decades, like to the 60s and 70s. And so, we wanted to uphold that tradition while, contributing. We want this to have like its own little niche in that existing pop culture. So, we have grandmothers that get in on the action. Everybody. Like I say, I hate to sound cryptic, but I don't want to spoil anything for the reader.
But I do. That does bring up the question though to me, and I should have asked this earlier because I asked you about your history with comics. I didn't ask you about your sort of history with wrestling. Obviously, you're knowledgeable about some things that you have some kind of a relationship with lucha in particular. What's your sort of like? When did you start watching, professional wrestling, and what brought that into this?
I was a WWF fan as a kid. So I was watching
which era, like the early WrestleManias, or are we talking about '80s Attitude Era, or Bret Hart in the early '90s?
No, this is '80s.
Oh, okay. So the big spectacle stuff.
This would have been like 85, 86.
Man.
Yeah. Jake the Snake, Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, Sergeant Slaughter.
My favorite's the Macho Man.
Yeah, man. Coco Beware, all kinds of like. The British Bulldogs.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God, I love that stuff, man. It's so cool. So I would say pre-WrestleMania 1, I believe, and through the first few WrestleManias. But by the time I had this idea, I knew that if I attempted to do this myself, I'd be faking it. Or somebody could call me out for like, dude doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to wrestling. And so that's why I was like, well, I need a writer who knows it. And our writer Guillermo not only knows wrestling and like MMA, but he is he's one of these writers who's known for extensive research. Mm-hmm. So he does we have fight manuals going back to like the 50s. He sends us articles, endless YouTube videos, compilations of guys getting clotheslined. Like I had like a 10-minute clothesline compilation I was watching the other night, and I'm like, this is the best job. So
did you have to take any moves? Did you have to take a clothesline before you started writing this?
No. Although I was like a little guy growing up, so I would get bullied a lot. So I was kind of a brawler, man. I was like, I had an older brother who would jump in for me if I needed him. So I would just fight guys left and right growing up. So I know what it's like to get hit in the face enough. I've broken my nose. So I've been there, done that. But Guillermo was learning the fight moves with the wrestling coach over Zoom during a pandemic.
Oh, that's wild.
His real dedication. And so now he's going to start doing that stuff live because he wants to know. It's one thing to say, okay, the guy grabs the other guy like this and they hold each other like that. But what is it like when you're in that position and close up? Then you start to realize, oh man, sweat could fall in somebody's eye. Little things. Maybe it's blood falls in somebody's eye and blinds them temporarily. You don't know, but
actually,
yeah, right. And I mean, so there's just stuff that happens when you're there in the real moment that could benefit the story. So, but as far as like being a wrestling fan, if you show me a guy with a mask fighting bad guys, I'm in.
Yeah.
Now, if he has, and then if you tell me he doesn't have superpowers, now I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially some of the shit that they do, especially like specifically guys like luchadors, like guys like Rey Mysterio. When I was a kid, he was always the smallest guy, but he would do all this highlight reel shit,
Yeah, it's high flying action. I mean, they go big every time. And so, if a luchador, we say that Milagro has gone into self-exile. Mm-hmm. So he's like, you know what? I messed up. He kills someone in the ring. After that, he's like, and it's a complex story, and we examine this in detail, although we know what not to answer as far as mystery. But he's like, I'm out. I'm done.
That's heavy stuff, and that happens for a lot. I mean, not
Yeah.
a lot, but it happens often enough.
It does happen. Yeah.
To
And
remind
so,
that wrestling is really genuinely dangerous, right?
yeah, this is addressed in the opening pages, and there's a 5-page preview of the opening scene on our Kickstarter. You can go check out right now with lettering. And we make the point right away that even though the matches may be scripted, gravity is real.
Yeah.
And you're getting thrown around. I mean, there's no way somebody's going to throw you that far off like the top rope or something. And there's no cushion or what. I mean, you're going to feel that. So you have to be athletic. But the reason why we keep the mask on Milagro is because, one, he's ashamed.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of hiding behind it. But two, he's wearing his shame for everyone to see. So it's sort of like you would almost say like suicide isn't good enough for him because he needs a more painful existence. He needs penance. He wants to pay for it.
And also it's a part of his identity that he can't escape from either, you know?
And well, so then when it comes time to defend the innocent, you're like, oh, is this like an origin story for a hero or what is this? and so you gotta read it, but basically
spoilers.
Right. I mean, the way I would describe it is this story couldn't have happened without Milagro, but it's not necessarily the story about what happens to Milagro.
Right.
It is, but it's not just that. So it's hopefully it's a little bit more complex, and that's part of the appeal.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting. I'm pretty pumped actually about it.
Cool.
So yeah, just to kind of circle back, we kind of talked about this a little bit before we hopped on, and we didn't plan this for this to happen today. But today is actually, and we actually did a show about this yesterday because I got my days crossed. But today is the 1 year sort of anniversary of the death of Michael Brooks, which is like one of the most tragic, horrible, things that could have happened. Like I was 37 years old, and he was one of the most sort of like bright, brilliant sort of people, very funny, very comedic, but also he had a very clear vision of like what his version of the world would be. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So first of all, can you imagine where he would be 10 years from now? Even the guy, I mean, he was aspirational, but just as far as like how people were benefiting from his commentary and his insight, just think about how that would have elevated him more and more. Right. And so for me, and this is true for anyone who consumed his content or followed him. I came to politics strictly as an American dealing with American politics. And one of the very first, the Michael Brooks show episodes that I saw had nothing to do with American politics at all. Although he did find a way to say, and this is how American influence affects the world, right? And I've always been like globally conscious, and I'm pro diversity my whole life. I mean, I came up with a comic that takes place in Mexico in 2004, and my rule was no gringos allowed, right? So I've always kind of known that the world needs more exposure to things that aren't themselves. But Michael really brought that home in a educational way, in a produced way, so that it was easy content to consume. And I'll never forget, my wife leaves the room and I change the channel to YouTube shows, right? And she's like, oh, come on, more politics. And she was in the other room doing something, and I had Michael Brooks on, and she came in and said, who is that? That was amazing. And I was like, finally, right? Like, she just hears people.
He has broad appeal. Absolutely, he did.
Yeah, and the way that, like I said, he's intensely serious and deep and extremely ridiculous in like just a few words. And so you get it, but you also want to come back for more.
Yeah.
And that's what he did for me. And I think that what his sister Leisha is doing now is amazing. I think in a lot of ways it's bringing more people to that content, which I think is exceptional on her part, but it also shows that what he was talking about a year ago, 5 years ago, is totally relevant today. He had the foresight to see that his topic of discussion in what was the present will resonate forever.
Mm-hmm.
And this is always these concerns will always be concerns that we should have. These struggles from the past relate to the present day struggles.
Yeah.
And that sort of activism, it's not propaganda. It's, like I said, it's totally educational, but at the same time, you can learn what somebody tells you, but for them to be informative gives you new ideas of your own and gives you ways to implement that information in your own life, your own community or society, whether you're living in the United States of America or Portugal or wherever. Like it all matters to everyone all the time.
Yeah.
His line about, be brutal with systems and be kind to people, where doesn't that apply? That applies literally everywhere, in every industry, in every part of the world, probably throughout the universe. We just don't know it yet. But there's too many people who are narrowed in on, I get pissed off about this, or I have activism just about this. And he had a way of blowing that model to smithereens to the point where it's like a Russian doll. Here's what we're talking about. Now we open the doll. Here's the micro version. Now here's the smaller version. We're getting down to the granular stuff. However, don't forget the big picture.
Yes, that's the key part. Right? You can very easily get caught up in a lot of this. I think about, and I don't mean to, invite vampires into the house, but like the force to vote thing, to sort of apply that to something like that, like the idea of fighting or like you doing everything that you can to get something like Medicare for all. And I really do wonder what Michael would have, thought about this. I don't know that there's no way to, do a seance and, get his take on it. Right. But I imagine that there would have been some level of frustration, specifically because Jimmy Dore was involved, but like also because of the sort of the way that it doesn't grapple with reality. And one thing that Michael always made sure to do was to sort of, he was very good at validating that concern of, people who are in basically crisis. I mean, like Medicare, we do need Medicare for all right now. However, like taking that and essentially taking that energy and pushing it towards concrete, actual things that can actually work and happen, and doing it in a way that doesn't piss off the people you're trying to validate or the people that are angry and upset and in crisis at a given moment. That's sort of like how I view it.
Yeah, I think so.
Like
there's
a sort of situation in a lot of ways.
Exactly. But I think there's two levels to the discourse. There's the discourse between commentators, and then there's the people getting involved in the discourse from the viewership, right?
Yeah.
Specifically around this topic. And I have to think that if Michael was still with us, there would be less people involved in the discourse and more people going, well, this guy handles this situation and these topics in such a manner that I'm almost embarrassed to be a part of this discourse. He was in a lot of ways, I don't know if he was bulletproof, but I don't think you would talk to Michael the same way you would talk to Sam. I think Sam is up for the debate and he's ready to mix it up. He's ready to get down into the right. But I think that Michael is like, you need to do a little bit of research before you debate that guy, because he's bringing a whole new level of knowledge. He's not just going to throw, talking points around.
And one way that he also, and again, this is something that I aspire to in a lot of senses. Like I aspire to essentially engage with disagreements without making them acrimonious in a certain way. Right. Yeah, and I think that he was really good at that. And he was really good at sort of like, I mean, he would go on programs that were not explicitly political and just talk to people who kind of would have like backwards views on whatever or undeveloped views on whatever, and just sort of like, I get where you're coming from, and this is why I disagree. Like kind of like treating people with respect and like they're human beings. You know what I mean?
I mean, he has a clip that goes around all the time now because of the Israel-Palestine thing. But he was like in a classroom. Some student asked him a question on the topic, and his answer became one of the most relevant points you can make.
Yeah.
About the conflict or the atrocity, however you want to look at it. I prefer atrocity, but it's one of those things where you can't deny he was just more intelligent than the rest of them in a lot of ways. But like I said, he could also play the dozens. He could take a jab at you and make you feel so stupid. Well, he can make you feel stupid by being smarter than you or having a better point than you, but also just outright teasing you.
Yeah.
And we might not see that again.
I mean, right? his comedy was incredible too. Like, first off, the bits that he did where he would just like his entire book. Have you ever read Against the Web? Like the entire introduction is just like, I don't want to make this all about Dave Rubin, and then he goes and does like 25 different like Dave Rubin.
There's DJ Danarchy has a compilation. It's 150 clips of Michael Brooks and friends laughing.
Oh yeah. Definitely
And
a lot of joy there.
It's like 7-8 minutes long. You could play that in between 7 or 8 minute clips of him talking about any political topic, whether it's American or international, and get it. You could be like, wow, it's equally entertaining to hear him talk about stuff that's totally educational, but also just tripping out, and that's rare.
Yeah, and also to talk about just a comedy just for 1 second, then we do have to go. Like we talked a little bit of this yesterday. Like his characters of Nation of Islam Obama, or Right with Mandela, or like Bernie Bro, or was it like Bernie Bro Bill Clinton or something like that? Just all of these like complete inversions of reality. And specifically, I thought that Nation of Islam Obama was the best because it was everything that Obama like wanted to portray the opposite of.
Right.
However, it's what like the right-wing people constantly tried to portray him as. And like one of the defining sort of characteristics of Obama, and he was fairly good at it, at least, was to sort of like de-escalate and de-radicalize the situation, because his politics were the same politics as Bill Clinton's. His politics were the same politics as like all these neoliberal Democrats, right? Mm-hmm. However, like the packaging was a little bit different. And he basically, like, if he would be terrified and horrified to be portrayed in that way, and like it was just such an inversion of reality, so absurd that it was just it was fantastic, Very good.
And it's permeated. I mean, it's to the point now where I think of funny things that I've heard, like that line. He's being right-wing Obama or something, and he says, white people on drugs look terrible and all white people look disgusting anyway, or something like that, right? And so now I just hear this as like a funny thing that somebody said with that voice. And then I'm like, oh, but wait a minute. Okay, so that was Brooks being in character on this show talking about this. And there's so much more to it. But I can, at this point, I can just live my life with this funny, hilarious thing that somebody said one time. And it doesn't matter what the context was.
Right.
That's true comedy. That's the real comedy there.
Yeah. So I guess we're gonna have to get, but one more time, talk a little bit more about Milagro and where people can find about it and where people can find you.
So check me out on Twitter @TheLetterHack, or go to our promo account for Milagro, which is @ComicMilagro, because when this gets made, I've had the idea so long, it will be a comic miracle. So so check that out. This is where you can find all the links to the Kickstarter. Like I said, we passed the first stretch goal, so now it's all just more icing on the cake. So whatever you sign up for, whichever reward level, there's already going to be more. We're adding pages. We're adding character design sections, a sketchbook section to the back of the book. So, supplemental features. There's still original art rewards where you can get artwork from the comic, like a page out of the comic. You can commission myself or the artist Ross Radke to do original commissions. And we have an add-on reward where I'll do full color digital portraits like I do of left-wing commentators. You can get up to 5 of those at $15 each. Usually I do them $25 each, and I'll only do like 1 or 2 at a time. So that's a pretty good deal. It's chapter 1 is in the bag. It's done. Chapter 2 is well underway. And before long, it'll be completely, it'll be in your hands. So this is the thing about Kickstarters. We can assure you 2 things. 1, the book will get made and it will get delivered. I guarantee that. I also guarantee that any money we make over the original goal through the Kickstarter will go into the project. I'm not going to paint my house or buy a car or anything like that. Everyone gets compensated who's involved. Everyone could get compensated more who's already involved. And if we have leftover money, it'll be a nest egg for the next volume. So there could be more down the road if we do well. And I hope there is. So Milagro Kickstarter is live until August 4th at midnight. It's the story of a failed luchador living in Mexico City, finding a path to redemption, but it just so happens the path to redemption is paved in blood. So it's going to be brutal, but it's a story with a lot of heart and soul too. So it's not just a fight comic, but it's essentially a fight comic.
Well, we love fight comics and we love stories. So there you go. I've actually sent the link to all of the videos that we have going. You can check it out there, and you can check out all the rewards that Matt just talked about. Follow him on Twitter at @LetterHack. Matt, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks. Thank you.
We'd love to have you back sometime. Just hang out,
Yeah, that'd be great. You're right, though. We should go now, or Andrea is going to be like, "Where is everyone?"
Yeah. So, yeah. All right, man. I'll talk to you later. And
Great.
you can also support Good Morning Comrade by going to patreon.com/Good Morning Comrade. You can be like our supporters: Ty Gitty, Michael H, Dan O, Jonathan H, Timothy C, Dragon Slayer 19, Andy L, Gary W, Kenneth F, Adam R, Trey M, Watermelon Pickle, Penelope D. And also we got a new one that I need to shout out recently. Riker H is also a supporter now. So there you go. Thanks, bud.
Thank you.
Great day.
Appreciate it.
All right. And for Twitch viewers, let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and raid. Who am I going to raid today? I was too wrapped up in the conversation to have a raid ready. Let's see here. Let's go with Lucid. Let's go with Lucid. All right. All right, everybody.
In service. Whoa. But
all right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.